I will get you to open it up to the book of Matthew, chapter 2. And as you do, I'll say this. A couple weeks ago, we started our series on Advent, and I kind of said, hey, listen, it is difficult, or it's a difficult task for a preacher to preach topically and to do it well. The reason being is that we don't want to, at least I hope we don't want to, just pick a topic and then kind of say what we want to say about that topic, right? Rather, if we are going to preach topically, we want to do it in a manner that is biblical, meaning that we are representing what the scriptures say in regard to that topic. And so one way to do that is to kind of cover, just kind of give a overview, what does the Bible say, right? Another way to do that is to actually pick a passage of scripture and go, here's what this passage says about this topic. And then kind of similar to that is you can actually take a book of the Bible and say, okay, what does this book say about this topic? And so this morning, our week of Advent is joy, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the book of Matthew and say, what does Matthew have to say about joy? And that the reason we're choosing Matthew isn't just purely an arbitrary reason. It's not like, oh, there's a few occurrences, so that's easy to preach. Rather, kind of as I dug through the scriptures, I would argue, I present to you that Matthew is relatively representative of what the scriptures are going to teach about joy. All right? So we're going to begin in a moment, but before we even do that, then I have to establish this. What in the world does joy actually even mean? Right? This is one of those words that oftentimes we use, but if we're pressed to define it, especially in a biblical manner, I think we might actually struggle a little bit, right? Because for many of us, we think of joy and we kind of maybe equate it to some sort of happiness, right? These joy that I feel when something goes right for me. Or others, we may kind of try and deepen that a little bit and be like, yeah, it's kind of a little bit like a lasting happiness and it's not grounded on circumstances. Let me present to you the definition of joy that Bill Mounce's New Testament lexicon gives. He says this: joy in the New Testament is more than emotion. It is the settled, spirit-given delight that arises from the redemptive acts and abiding presence of God. It is rooted in divine initiative. It's experienced in the believer and expressed both now and in the age to come. Right, let me dumb that definition down for us a little bit. It is a settled, spirit-given delight that arises from Jesus' redemption. Right? So, because Jesus has saved you, his Spirit gives you delight that is rock solid, not fleeting. That's what joy is in a biblical sense. Now let's unpack what Matthew has to say about joy. First, he tells us it is the result of finding Jesus, the one who God is directing you to look for. So Matthew 2, 1-11 says this. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and he ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go, search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I may too come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So these wise men recognize that something of cosmic significance is happening based on, get this, their reading of the stars. Okay? So let that mess with your theology for a moment. God is using pagan practices along with his design of the natural order, combined with his miraculous work in the heavens, to bring the nations to the reality of his ancient promise that a Messiah is going to come and save not only Israel, but the world. Okay? So let me tell you just for a minute what this is not. This is not an invitation for us to jump into syncretism and go, well, look, God used some pagan practices to bring people to Jesus back in the book of Matthew, right? I have seen Christians try to justify this. This is not an invitation for you to jump full on into zodiac signs and add that to your form of Christianity, all right? What this is telling us that God is not beyond meeting people where they are at in what they know in order to bring them to Jesus, right? The result when the wise men find Jesus then is that they rejoice exceedingly with great joy and they worship him. There's actually a great irony that's going on in Matthew's gospel that these Gentile wise men are the first people in that gospel to recognize the Jewish Messiah. It's not the Jews who should have seen him coming. It is the world, the Gentiles who come and recognize who Jesus is. Their recognition of the divine Son results in rejoicing and joy and worship. And so we see at the beginning of Matthew's gospel that joy starts with finding Jesus. So then the question that this presses towards us becomes, have you recognized that same truth? Right? If you want joy, if you want lasting joy, you need to know who Jesus is. And then the question from there becomes, man, if you recognize that, are you filled with joy? And does that push you to rejoicing and to worship? See, in fact, according to Matthew 13:44, which says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up, then in his joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. According to that, if we recognize who Jesus is, if we recognize what his kingdom is about, then we will joyfully give up everything else in order to possess the kingdom. So then let me ask you this question. Are you joyfully buying the field? That's a metaphor, by the way. You don't actually need to buy a field. That's talking about the kingdom of heaven. Are you joyfully giving everything you have to obtain the kingdom of heaven based on the fact that you have found Jesus? Let me have a moment of confession for you this morning. I realized very early on that there was a certain level of irony in the fact that I was the one who ended up preaching about joy. So let me explain to you why that is. After I graduated from high school and took a year of doing absolutely nothing but sitting on a couch and playing video games, which I don't encourage you to do, it's just what I did, right? I went to Bible college, got my act together. As I went to Bible college and I began to study the scriptures, I also began to understand that there was so much more depth to the Bible and so much more depth to the Christian faith than what I had been able to grasp growing up, all right? And as I continued to study and as I continued to dig into the scriptures and the Christian faith, I began to struggle. And what my struggle was not actually with my faith. I was very, very confident and satisfied in who Jesus was, and so my faith was incredibly strong. Rather, my struggle became, I was seeing the depth that existed in the scriptures, the depth that was available to us in faith, and then I would go to our chapels and I would sing songs that lacked depth, or I would hear sermons being spoken that were unbiblical, and I would lose my proverbial stuff, right? So my wife can tell you this, my third year and my fourth year of Bible college, sitting beside me in chapel was not a joyful experience. Rather, it was an experience where you would get to listen to me judge the idiots who are picking the songs and the dummy who's preaching the wrong thing, right? I'd like to say that that's an exaggeration, but my wife is here and she would tell you it's probably not that far from the truth. And so what happened was I kind of went on this journey of adding this kind of fruit to the spiritual tree, which is grumpiness, right? So there was this general aspect of I would at very many times be sitting in church services, in conferences, and instead of having some sort of joy in Jesus, I had grumpiness in Jesus, right? And I can tell you with a certain level of confidence that this has been a struggle for me throughout my adult life. And it's not a struggle that I have come out the other end in because, man, can I just tell you this? I'm still passionate about the scriptures and the depth that therein lies. I'm still passionate about the fact that our faith has a real level of depth to it. And so I still get frustrated when I run into things where I see, man, that's just not a representation of what the Christian faith is. Right? So I promise you, these aren't the days of Elijah. And I get a little bit grumpy when I hear that song sung. Okay? Sorry, I shouldn't throw things personally under the bus. But what happens in all of this, and I've actually had to do some repentance this week. Not because I care about scriptural depth, not because I want to see that depth in songs that we sing and sermons that we hear, but rather because I have allowed those sorts of things to cause me to hedge joy in. Because I am afraid that if I show joy in the midst of some of the things that are going on around me, it will look like I'm approving of things that I don't want to approve in, and all of a sudden I'm sawing off the branch that I'm sitting on because I'm just grumpy about everything, rather than, yes, caring about the scriptures, yes, caring about accuracy, yes, caring about the depth of the faith, and at the same time not allowing other people to take joy away from me when I'm actually just kind of doing it to myself. And so I had a moment over the course of this past week where I had to sit back and go, dear God, forgive me for suppressing joy. Dear God, forgive me. And then, man, there's just like an existential crisis that happens with it. Where else have I been doing this? And what I'd say with that as we come back around is finding Jesus should bring us joy. But then there's a warning that we run into in Matthew's gospel, and that is to be careful because joy, especially newfound joy, can be choked out. So turn over to Matthew chapter 13 with me. I want to make sure I get this right. We're going to read Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 to 9, and then 20 to 21 says this. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. And then we're going to jump down to verse 20 and 21. It says this. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. So can I just tell you something reflectively? And I don't have an official statistic for this. This is experiential. I would guess that over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, as we have seen Bethel Church kind of grow, right, which is like exciting, it's good, but I would guess that the number of people who we have seen come to faith in Jesus and stick is probably almost mirrored by the number of people who we have seen who have come to Jesus, had that wise man moment where they go, I found it, and then faded away. Like they're just not here. We don't see them. We don't know where they are. And I don't say that to be judgmental. I don't say that to be harsh. I say that to be like, man, Jesus knew what he was talking about. Because there is a gospel reality, there is a Bible reality that says, man, sometimes people will come and profess faith, they will profess and find joy, and it will wither and die, and that's that. Now, I'll say this, man, we don't give up, by the way. Like, I could think of people as this week as I was prepping this sermon. We do not give up on people who are like, man, I don't know where they are. Rather, we maybe give them a phone call and say, hey, how are you doing? Rather, maybe we get down on our knees and we say, God, I'm thinking about this person right now. Would you, by your Spirit, be at work in their life? Because I recognize that sometimes people have a longer path to Jesus, some people do than others. And at the same time, we recognize that there will always be those individuals who seem to have great joy. And then according to Matthew, tribulation and persecution show up and it gets choked out. It's interesting, Luke's account of this same text, Jesus says, in a time of testing, they fall away. And so there is a warning there for us not to have our joy in finding Jesus choked out. And the remedy is this: we need a joy that can face opposition. So flip back with me, Matthew 5:10-11, it says this. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All right. Now, lest you think this means some people, specifically other people, need the kind of faith that actively shows joy by rejoicing in persecution, let me explain to you what is going on in this text. Matthew is using a literary device called an inclusio. And what an inclusio is it says something to start. Then it says a whole bunch of other things, and then it says the same thing that it started with again at the end. And what that signifies is this: from the start where it said one thing to the end where it said that thing again, everything in between it pertains to that thing. So what we see in Matthew's gospel here is in verse 3, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Then in verse 10, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." You hear that? Theirs is the kingdom of heaven on both ends. So everything between kingdom of heaven and kingdom of heaven is about the kingdom of heaven. So listen to me. Opposition, persecution, difficulty comes with the territory of being someone who is receiving the kingdom of heaven. If yours is the kingdom, so is being reviled, persecuted, and talked about on Jesus' account. In fact, I would go so far to say this: if you don't face some level of this, it might actually be because you are disobedient in the task of proclaiming the gospel, or you are disobedient in the task of living out the Beatitudes, what Jesus tells us the kingdom of heaven is about. If we don't face some level of this, it might be because we are disobedient in the task of proclaiming the gospel. And can I just be honest with you for a second? I am a horrible evangelist. I'm just being honest. One of the things that I felt God pressing on my life and into my heart is like, man, I need to actually be purposeful in looking for opportunities to share the gospel, to share about Jesus with the people that I'm running into. Now let me flip this on you a little bit. You also need to be purposeful in looking for opportunities to share the gospel, to share Jesus with people that you're running into. But man, can I just be honest with you? Most of us, if you're like me, we aren't good at that. We're not even looking for the opportunities. And because we're not looking for the opportunities, we could go about our lives living comfortably because there's no chance for people to look back at us and say something like, man, I'm not into that, you're an idiot. Just a thought. And what Jesus tells us is when we face reviling, when we face persecution, our response is to rejoice. Why? Because it's evidence that the kingdom is ours. Now let me just say this. Being persecuted and being reviled is not the only marker of possessing the kingdom. So listen to me. I love you. Sometimes people revile you not because you're gospeling, but because you're revolting. And it has nothing to do with Jesus. Sometimes sincerely held religious beliefs can lead to persecution, and man, you could be dead wrong. Think about the amount of flack that Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons take for going door to door, right? They would, I say, receive some level of persecution for that practice, and they are dead wrong because they get who Jesus is wrong. This is where context is important. Persecution is accompanied by, when we read about the kingdom of heaven, being poor in spirit, mourning sin, being meek, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, being merciful, being pure in heart, and being peacemakers. And in all of that together, If we face hardship because of it, it's because we're taking hold of the kingdom, we're receiving it. So then, rejoice. And then Matthew tells us the ultimate reason why we rejoice in joy is because we know that Jesus gives us a future hope and an eternal joy. So I want you to flip over to Matthew 25 with me for a moment. We're going to read verses 14 to 23. And there's more to this text, verses 24 to 30. We should not ignore. They are important, but we're not going to read them today. All right? So, Matthew 25, 14 to 23 says this. For it will be going on a journey, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. And he who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of the servant came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the first or the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also said to the one who came forward, or who had 2 talents and came forward, saying, Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 talents more. And his master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. For those who receive what is given to them by the master, which is Jesus, and invest it, his invitation is, enter into the joy of your master. Now, one of the things that I want us to wrap our minds around in this is this. Just how joyful is the reality that the return of Christ and our entrance into eternity will be. Right? Like sometimes I think that we are so caught up in our moments that we forget, and can I just say, let me unpack this properly. We are so caught up in living faithfully in the moment oftentimes that we almost feel guilty about looking forward to a future joy. Because what has happened at times is there are people who are so focused on the return of Christ that they essentially become kind of useless in the moment, and their Christianity doesn't really have any grit to it. But what I want us to be encouraged is to have a real and gritty Christianity that is applicable right here and right now, and to also have an absurd hope and joy in the reality that Jesus is coming back. And man, it is going to be good. I think one of the problems that we have is that we have adopted a mindset, especially in Western Christianity, that isn't biblical in regard to what happens when Jesus comes back. And so what we've been taught and what we think is, man, one day I'm going to die, and when I die, I'm going to go to heaven, and then everybody's going to kind of join me eventually, and this world will burn and we'll forget all about it and go on living in this kind of spiritual reality. Can I tell you something? That is not the biblical picture of our future. Rather, the biblical picture is, when you or I die, we are, if we have faith in Jesus, with Jesus. But Jesus is at some point going to return physically. And Thessalonians tells us that when Jesus physically returns with the blowing of a trumpet and the cry of an archangel, that the dead in Christ will physically rise. There will be a miraculous occurrence where a person's soul and body are restored to each other. And then those who have risen from the dead, along with those who are alive when Jesus will return, will be caught up into the air to meet Christ as he descends and reigns. And so the picture is, and you can go to the book of Revelation, which we will be, that the city of God is going to come down to earth, that God's creation is cleansed and renewed, that God will dwell with us. There will be no more sin, no more strife, no more death, no more sickness, no more hoping that I've got enough to retire or praying to God that, man, I could just make it through this week. Like, can you imagine living in that kind of context where everything is good all the time? Where all the best things that you've experienced in this life are just multiplied beyond what you can imagine. All while God is reigning, while Jesus is present, while we bask in the goodness of his glorious nature, enjoying God, enjoying his creation, enjoying each other. Like, can you imagine the kind of joy that we will live in for eternity? The question becomes, well, how is that even possible? We'll turn to one more text, Matthew 28, 1-10. It says this. Now after the Sabbath, towards the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled, and they became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. See, I have told you." So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. And they ran to tell his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came up and took hold of his feet, and they worshiped him. See, it's possible that we will live in this kind of joy because Jesus is shockingly, joyfully alive. He has conquered death. He's ascended to where he sits at the right hand of the Father. He is coming back. And my friends, that is why we can know and have joy. That is why that joy will transcend our circumstances. That's why even when we face the hardest things that this life has to throw at us, we can step back and in the midst of grief, in the midst of trial, in the midst of trouble, go, man, I still have joy. Because Jesus is alive and Jesus is coming back. So my question for you this morning is simple. Have you encountered the risen Jesus? Because listen to me, in the risen Christ, there is joy beyond what we can even begin to fathom. Would you stand with me this morning? God, we thank you that you have given us reason for joy. And we pray, Jesus, that you would help us to be a people who live in that reality. Not some sort of kind of trite happiness that is fleeting, but a deep-seated, spirit-given, rock-solid joy that is able to proclaim Jesus is alive. And God, as we reflect in this Advent series on this reality, would you, by your Spirit, place your joy inside of us? God, I pray especially for those this morning who are grieving, for those who are struggling, for those who the world would look at and say, man, there ain't a whole lot of reason for joy there. I pray that by the power of your Spirit, you would just fill them with your joy, with a deep-seated satisfaction in the life of Jesus.